this election from the foreign policy point of view. That's an area where you have an expertise. People are concerned that there are two wars going on, and they probably thought that Trump is a person who can probably deal with it better. Do you think that that is one of the issues that people would have debated in their minds before they voted?
Indeed, Trump, there are two ways of looking at it. One, from an Indian perspective, in terms of how India-US ties would be impacted depending on who wins the election. The other is, as you mentioned, the global crises confronting much of the world, including the conflicts in between Russia and Ukraine, and between Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah in West Asia. Now, broadly speaking, the key to understanding the lay of the land, as it were, is to understand the personalities and policies of the two people in question, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. If you look at the Biden-Harris presidency in terms of India-US ties, Mark, two things stand out. One, it was under Biden and Harris that the Quad summit, the Quad was elevated to the annual summit level, number one. And number two, India and US set up what is known as the ICET, the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, which focuses on semiconductors and so on. So these two key developments have taken place in the last 4 years under the Biden-Harris presidency. If you look at Trump 1.0 between 2016 and 2020, two things stand out. One, he was instrumental in reviving the Quad in the first place, number one. And number two, his focus, accent, emphasis on the Indo-Pacific in general and China in particular, where he sought to impose tariffs and launched a trade war, as it were. So these two issues stand out in terms of the Trump presidency, reviving the Quad and focusing clearly, spelling out the strategy in terms of the Indo-Pacific region. If you look at the other crises, other hotspots, under Trump we saw the US, one, recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, number one. And number two, it was Trump's son-in-law, Mark, Jared Kushner, was instrumental in executing the Abraham Accords, Israel's agreement with UAE, Bahrain and Morocco to start with. On Iran, we saw Trump quit the Iranian nuclear deal, and that has consequences which run to this day. Climate change, he famously said that it was a hoax, and that his answer, by the way, his solution, as he spelled out in the last campaign speech in Michigan just 24 hours ago, Mark, was, he said, drilling, meaning that he wants to drill for more oil and gas in the US to shore up the US economy. But to his credit, he ended up in succeeding in eliminating the ISIS terrorist Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in Syria in his first term in office. And also, it was under Trump that India happened to remove or reform the constitution and remove Article 370, and that we know how that played out in the immediate term. In terms of the global crises, Mark, it's a big question mark what will happen if either Harris or Trump win in terms of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, in terms of the West Asia situation, in terms of North Korea in particular, and also in terms of China and the EU-NATO relations. All these things are up in the air depending on who comes to occupy 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Mark, in Washington, D.C., which, by the way, the road to reaching there passes through the state of Pennsylvania in no uncertain terms.
Okay. So Pennsylvania, the results of Pennsylvania, we're still awaiting, right?
Well, the latest results, we have leads for some states. If I can just get up, the latest leads coming in. So, Mark, the polls are closing in almost half of the 50 states of the US, which means that about 26 states polls have closed already, number one. Number two, leads suggest that Trump is leading on 6 states, Indiana, South Carolina, Kentucky, Georgia, West Virginia and Ohio, which includes Georgia, one of the 7 key swing states, and Harris leading on 2, Vermont and North Carolina. That's the situation. That's how the numbers stack up as we speak.
So we're joined by our guests as well, Prabhu Dayal, former senior diplomat, and Dr. Swasti Rao, foreign affairs experts. Thank you, both of you, for being with us. Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, the fact that Kamala Harris is the vice president of a term that is being completed. I mean, could she was trying her best to probably look at this without carrying that anti-incumbency. But, you know, while listening to a lot of the voters, they seem to have suggested that the last 4 years have not been the best years of their lives. So, I mean, so that would have really worked against her, wouldn't it have?
Well, first of all, good morning.
Good morning.
And I must compliment my friend Ramesh Ramchandran's very apt description that the road to Washington passes through Pennsylvania, because it is also geographically true. While, of course, what he meant was that the road to the presidency passes through Pennsylvania. It's a very apt description. Now, it is true that the last 4 years have been problematic in many respects. But some of the problems arose because of the COVID situation. For instance, the economy slumped. Then there was a housing crisis of sorts because the pace of construction slowed down dramatically. And then, of course, there were some other issues, like, for instance, for meeting the costs related to controlling COVID, the government had to resort to some steps pertaining to taxation. That in turn also had an effect on the welfare of the people. So, as I see it, there are 10 most important issues which are going to be of consequence in these elections. Some of them, of course, arise from the current Biden presidency, but some are of a more enduring nature. And these 10 issues, of course, are inflation, taxation, abortion, immigration. Then, of course, foreign policy is very important. Trade is important. Climate, healthcare, law and order, the gun control issue. These are the main topics on which the electorate is going to concentrate on. And as I said, some arise from the policies of the Biden administration. As I said, COVID has been a factor, so healthcare becomes a major issue. Affordable healthcare has always been a major problem confronting the section of society in the United States which is not so well off. And while Harris has been emphasizing that she would devote more state resources towards confronting this problem, Trump had been seen to be a little indifferent.
Right.
But now he has said that if he is elected, he would improve affordable health care. But of course, he has not given any specific ideas which would clarify how he would bring about improvements in affordable health care. Of course, you know, gun control is an issue which has increased in importance.
Right.
Because there are so many mass shootings in the United States.
Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, we are getting some news that's coming in. We're treating it as breaking news. These are projections that are clear. We can see that according to AP, Harris has won Vermont and Trump has taken Kentucky. We played this out earlier as well. We have updates on this. Polls have closed in the first 6 U.S. states, including in Georgia, and Trump has taken West Virginia as well.
Mark,
yeah, go ahead.
Trump is projected to win Florida as well. So the current projections based on the early leads, Trump is leading on 90 seats as against 27 to Kamala Harris. That's 90 versus 27. The latest seat to be projected is Florida, where Trump is projected, as I said, to win that state.
Indeed. Well, I mean, according to numbers that are still coming in, it appears that there are quite a few blue states that are also appearing. as we speak. So it's
Harris,
still early days.
Yeah,
Still
leading
early
on
days.
Vermont and in North Carolina as well, another key swing state.
Right. In fact, according to the CNN polls that I'm watching, it seems to show that Harris is ahead in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in Virginia, and even in Texas. But of course, these are very early days. We're turning to Dr. Swasti Rao as well. Dr. Rao, how would you, analyze these results as they're coming in? Were they on lines that you expected?
Well, a very good morning to you. And as far as the lines on our expectations were concerned, I think everybody here and everywhere else in the world as well actually mentioned very clearly that this is going to be a very tight race, and one has to watch out for what happens in the key swing states. And this is, I guess, turning out as we were expecting, which is that it is indeed a very, very tight race. And finally, I think we will come to know in a while which candidate is making heads where, because for now we all knew that there are certain states that traditionally vote Democrat and they have voted Democrat. There are others that vote Republican. They have voted Republican. And you just mentioned in your latest updates that there are certain two of the key swing states, and one has I think both Harris and Trump have won each. And then you mentioned about Pennsylvania, and ultimately it is going to be Pennsylvania because of the number of seats it has. So it has about 19 of those electoral colleges out there. So basically I think this is going to be a very tight race. But end of the day, I mean, looking at it from India's perspective, if you allow me to take that discussion forward that Ambassador Chawla was just having, and I think everybody is interested in India, is that how does it change or not change anything from India's perspective? And I have been arguing that as far as drastic measures are concerned, I do not see any drastic measures, although of course some fine-tuning will happen depending upon who comes to power, because the Republicans and the Democrats have their own distinct worldview, especially with regard to India. Let's remember that India right now has a trade surplus with the United States, and the United States is also India's biggest trading partner. So if Donald Trump were to come back, he's gone on record saying some very, very strong and harsh things about sanctioning those that are promoting de-dollarization, and he's known for the trade wars and known for higher tariffs, etc. So I think that kind of a situation, more protectionism is expected. But I guess one thing, Mark, that people do not realize is that even with somebody like Kamala Harris coming to power, we will still see some protectionism, because by and large trade protectionism is the mood in American trade ecosystem. So maybe it would more be a difference of degrees than a really drastic thing. The other thing about the Indo-Pacific, I completely agree that larger convergence is going to continue regardless of who comes to the White House, because of how the geopolitics is evolving. So we are going to see in a long-term view, my perspective perhaps would be that both the countries would develop the strategic communication to manage the points of friction, such as the Pannu controversy, or things like sanctioning of certain 19 Indian firms for giving dual-use technology to Russia. So I think these kind of things would be managed better. But as far as the long-term perspective is concerned, starting from the last decade or so, we will see that convergence, going even further. So I do not see too much of a change in Indo-Pacific. However, the one thing that everybody expects is that somebody like Trump would come, and he has been projecting himself as a problem solver compared to the Democrats as the problem makers, especially when it comes to Europe and West Asia. You also mentioned, and I think Ramesh also mentioned that, how his son-in-law was instrumental in normalizing West Asia. On the contrary, right now the global system that he's going to inherit is such that even in the case of Russia, Ukraine, or West Asia, I think in Europe, Putin wants Trump to come, Europe wants Kamala Harris to come, but in West Asia, Netanyahu wants Trump to come. Basically, long story short, the point that I'm trying to make here is that even for these two regions, starting from Ukraine, I do not think that Trump really has a plan to end the war. He remains unpredictable, and it is because of its unpredictability that a lot of people in Europe have already started the process of what is known as Trump proofing, which is they're trying to sort of, stand on their own feet if Trump were to come and actually reduce support to them, military support to them, and NATO. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I think when it comes to Ukraine, let's also remember that because he is at his, at the core, he's a transactionalist politician and a businessman at heart. He could also activate the Lend-Lease agreement that was signed by the Biden administration, but never really activated because Biden kept taking money from the presidential drawdown when it came to Ukraine. So what I'm saying is that instead of coming and providing a knee-jerk solution that he's very much capable of, it's the global system which perhaps puts some certain restraints on how far American foreign policy can become isolationist or globalist. And finally, there's this argument that I find very appealing, Mark, which is that of course, we do see between Harris and Trump, we do see, both these sides represent very competing natures of the world, American worldview. Trump champions in an inward-looking foreign policy, an inward-looking American policy, and Kamala Harris, kind of champions an outward-looking, foreign policy, or more globalism-oriented foreign policy. But frankly, I think that whoever comes to White House next is going to be sort of, having these restraints on how much they can maneuver as far as sweeping maneuvers are concerned. And what I will see is a perseverance of a conservative kind of an internationalism, which is a kind of a middle path. So I do not see very drastic measures in foreign policy. However, fine-tuned to, of course, how their worldviews are. With respect to India, I expect little change. What we have to watch out for is the trade protectionism I just mentioned, and of course the question of visas. Because for Trump, how does he make America great again? So make America great again by also making in America, buying in America, and hiring in America, and that's where it kind of affects the interests of the Indian service class. But then a lot of speculation out there. I'll probably get back to you, and let's just discuss the election results further.
Right. Let's turn to Amritpal Singh, who's at Palm Beach in California, beg your pardon, in Florida. Amrit, if Trump, supposing he wins, is going to be constrained by international institutions, what do you think? How would we understand the rhetoric, especially with regard to climate change? Which has been an issue that is affecting the entire world, and it's affected the U.S. quite significantly this year with so many hurricanes. Maybe you were there already, when some of these recent hurricanes came.
Yeah, when Helene hit, it hit Florida, and the Floridans were impacted by that. They are impacted by climate change, but as happens, Mark, people, when they vote, issues like international issues or things like climate change take a backseat. More important issues that affect their everyday life in terms of living, rising costs of the rising costs of living, housing affordability, jobs, economy, etc. They take precedence. Though Ramesh, when we were together on the show about a couple of hours back, one of the first surveys that came put democracy as a bigger issue for people here, or the lack of it here. But subsequent surveys said that economy was a bigger issue for the people when they voted. So I think what Donald Trump has been saying he's been saying that fracking will go on, and I will pull out more oil, and that I need to pump up my economy, and he's been using rhetoric against the Chinese, saying their EVs shall be banned, etc. But all that to a certain extent is election rhetoric, because it's directly it's about what appeals to people more. But what he does when he comes into the White House is often seen, is very different. Political statements are very different from the decisions that governments make. Mark, if you allow me, I want to come back at the results or the projections really that are coming in right now. I think most interesting is that in Georgia, which is a swing state, Donald Trump has a 14% lead with about 36% of the vote counted. With this kind of a lead, it looks like Georgia could end up going red. Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina going red, no surprises there. Vermont, projected to go blue, no surprises again there. West Virginia, Alabama, red, Connecticut, red, with huge margins, of course. And these projections are, if they are, the margins are huge, generally go right. Florida, again a red state where Trump has 12% vote with about 88% or 12% lead with about 88% of the vote counted. Now, what is interesting amongst the other states really is the swing states, Mark, is that North Carolina seems to be going blue, and in the projections, and Georgia seems to be going red out of the two swing states that have projections right now, Mark.
And Mark, if I can quickly add to what Amritpal had to report there, we're getting some more leads now. Projections suggest that Trump is leading in Tennessee, in Missouri, in Alabama, in Oklahoma and South Carolina, and Harris is leading in the key swing state of Pennsylvania, also Maryland and Massachusetts. So 3 states going to Kamala Harris: Pennsylvania, Maryland, Massachusetts, whereas Trump is leading on Tennessee, Missouri, Alabama, Oklahoma and South Carolina, in addition to the other states of Indiana, South Carolina, Kentucky, Georgia, West Virginia and Ohio. So at last count, 99 to Trump and 27 to Kamala Harris, Mark.
Okay, so Trump is closing in on the 100 mark in the Electoral College as we speak. Amrit, I understand that you have some work, so thanks very much for joining us for the moment. We'll continue with our discussions here. Ambassador Prabhudayal, Amrit was saying that the economy is the key issue here. And as voters were going through that was what was reflected on their minds. But the US, being the largest economy in the world, has also the largest debt. And most economists believe that this is an unsustainable problem. Their debt is about some $35 trillion or something like that, how would you look at, the way that they're going to go deal with this? In fact, that's one of the issues if Trump wins, Elon Musk is supposed to be handling, cutting down the costs.
Donald Trump has been saying that he will go in for some tax cuts. But it is understood that these tax cuts would be on the wealthy. So that will not really help to ease the budgetary deficit situation. Kamala Harris has been saying that she will raise taxes on big businesses. And in fact, she has unveiled a number of measures that could end up easing the tax burden on families which have lower incomes. So this overall question of the debt situation in the United States has also to be looked in the against the background of how the common person perceives the whole idea of tax raises or tax cuts. So if you have to ease the budgetary situation, you have to raise taxes. But then if you raise taxes, then you annoy some sections. So it's a catch-22 situation. Let me mention that from what Amritpal said, that Pennsylvania is now inclined to, it appears that it's going to the Democrats, it's going to Kamala Harris. It's a crucial state. But of course, Donald Trump probably had some indications that things were not going his way in Pennsylvania. That is why he started shouting that there has been election fraud committed there. So I expect that there could be some trouble in this context, because he would certainly appeal against the results if they don't go his way in Pennsylvania. Now, to come back to some issues pertaining to the economic steps and where they impact India. You know, if you recall that during Donald Trump's earlier term, the annual growth rate of trade with India was only 7.5%, whereas during the Biden era, it had already crossed 9%. So there were some steps which Donald Trump had taken, which had adversely impacted the trade situation with India. So I think that if Donald Trump resumes policies of that sort, like for instance, he had eliminated GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences, and that alone sort of affected about $6.3 billion worth of Indian exports, whereas Kamala Harris is in favor of renewing the Generalized System of Preferences, which has a beneficial impact for India. So, since Donald Trump has a protectionist approach, and he in fact wants to renegotiate a lot of trade deals, while Kamala Harris is in favor of ensuring the continuity of multilateral trade agreements. I think there is a perceptible difference in the policies of these two, and that will certainly impact the overall economic relationship with India.
Right.
So as I said, there would be some benefits which may come to India on account of the sort of tariffs that Donald Trump plans to impose, particularly against Chinese import. He has categorically said that he would go in for higher tariffs on Chinese products. And there is a possibility that Indian products could then replace Chinese imports into the United States. At the same time, of course, Kamala Harris appears to be quite supportive of India's trade interests and doesn't intend to bring about any major change in this context.
Indeed. So the situation in Pennsylvania is that Harris is quite ahead, but there's only about 7% of the vote counted so far.
That's
so
right.
there's plenty of counting to take place. Dr. Swasti Rao, what do you feel? I mean, we've always known that both sides, India, of course, has bipartisan support in the United States, but for some reason, people, the general public in India feels that Trump seems to have been better for India. Is that actually the case or not?
Well, I mean, in short, why Indians feel more comfortable with Republicans and in the White House is basically because they do less of international lecturing, and on the other hand, Democrats are known to be lecturing all the time about all kinds of democratic backsliding in anything and everything that they consider, their views on, and that is something which is of course not liked in India, because from India's perspective, this kind of strategic communication also somewhere fundamentally explains what kind of a mutual trust and a mutual respect it does a strategic relationship have. And if you go by the kind of statements that our Foreign Affairs Minister has been making, Dr. Jaishankar, I think India does put a lot of premium on the factor of strategic mutual trust and mutual respect. And part of that mutual respect is coming from what I just mentioned, that of course from India's perspective, then we would prefer having somebody like the Republicans who are less inclined towards this international lecturing compared to the Democrats. But let me just also explain something important, which I think is usually not discussed when we're discussing trade. While of course, on the one hand, like I said, that with Trump in power, we will see a kind of change, and he has a very strong rhetoric on China, and he has a very strong rhetoric on Make in America, etc. And that rhetoric on China can land up helping India, because then Indian products can replace, etc. But the one thing that is missed often in this particular argument is that because Indian economy remains so dependent when it comes to raw materials, etc. from China, so the more India becomes in a position to export to the the West, the more India imports from China. So in many ways, you see this kind of a circular kind of a, closing in of these gaps where fundamentally the global economy is unable to really decouple or de-risk from China because of the major dependence that major countries, have, because when they say manufacturing, ultimately the raw materials, etc., that dependency continues to grow on China. So that is one catch that perhaps we need to understand better, that even though on the face of it, the figures tell a different picture, ultimately deep down the decoupling or the de-risking is actually reversed and you are like even more dependent. So that's one part, that's a caveat I think that we need to be discussing. On the other hand, of course, it is good for India if we are able to try and divert some part of that world manufacturing away from China. Of course, it will be very, very good. The third thing is that I do see more strategic convergence, and for example, what happened in the case of Biden administration, and especially you mentioned in your opening remarks about ISET and the semiconductor agreement. I think it's these kind of things that are going to play a larger role generally, when it comes to India and the US, and the role why they are called the most important strategic partnership when it comes to stabilizing the security of the world. I think not much attention is given to the fact that the fabrication agreement, the semiconductor is not about any semiconductors, but it is about complex semiconductors. And these complex semiconductors, the world is still being dependent on countries like Taiwan and China. So by sort of, turning that attention to India, the complex semiconductors have a wide range of applicability, not only in modern warfare, technologies, but also in every single modern, electronic items that you see. So with these kind of things, with these kind of supply chains being, rewritten when it comes to bringing India into the picture, I think this is something which is definitely going to grow. We have
Right.
seen how India's defense exports more than 50% have gone to the US, so that will also continue. But I am, of course, a little worried about what happens to trade, the status given to Indian trade, and I think that is where perhaps we would need to have more communication with the Trump administration if he were to come to power. Yes.
Right. We leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much, Dr. Swasti Rao and Ambassador Prabhu Dayal and Ramesh. Thanks for being with us for the moment. Of course, this coverage will continue after a short break. Well, that's all we have in this edition of the DD India Special News Hour, which is focusing on the race to the White House. But you can always contact us about your thoughts on the news of the day. And for those of you on the go, get the latest news and updates from across the world on the DD India mobile app, which is available on both Android and iOS platforms by scanning the QR code and downloading it. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. Thanks very much for watching. Namaskar.